Hello, my Aloha tribe, and welcome to the Aloha Perspective, where you get a little bit of something and a whole lot of everything, and apparently a froggy voice. Oh, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good day, wherever you are. So, wow. That was a rough start. Oh no, the coffee's fine. It was a rough start. So I got this a while ago, and I keep seeing shows where people are drinking with their cups and saucers. So I wanted to drink with mine. And I can't show you the bottom of the cup, obviously, because, I'm drinking out of it. That would cause a mess. But I love this tea and saucer set. I also have another one that a friend gave me that I enjoy. But yeah, this one has the moon phases. It's from Goddess Provisions, but I love it. Good morning, Muddy. Yeah, I know. What is it with today? Must be Thursday. So anyways, kind of a funny story on how we got to today's subject, which by the way was very, 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 very last minute. What am I trying to say? I'm making a mess over here. This is why I need a teapot for my coffee. But anyways, so I reached out to Muddy and I said, oracles are subject, and she didn't see it until this morning. Then it was like, I don't know. And I'm not shaming anyone. It's just, it kind of seems to go with the subject we're going to do today. Because here's the thing. I couldn't sleep last night. So I'm sitting there and, I do have a soapbox thing that we are going to do on Monday, but I didn't want to end the week on a soapbox. It's been a fun week. We've talked about a lot of things. I can't remember everything we talked about. Oh yeah, we talked about what the show's about. Yesterday felt a little bit heavy, so I figured, let's just go light. So I came up this morning. So last night I couldn't sleep. And I generally go down the YouTube rabbit hole when I do that, just watching everything and anything. And of course, once you watch one thing, 5 million things of the same thing come into your algorithm. But every so often things pop in there that it's like, why is that in there? And I really feel like this was put in my path for a reason, because I do love this stuff. But I started watching this thing, and I want to preface it with this, okay? This could get graphic in some of the things I talk about, but I'm going to try to move past that thing. But we are going to talk, I'm going to open up with 9/11, all right? It still blows my mind that it's going to be 25 years this year. But that was a day that deeply affected me. That is probably as close to seeing an actual trauma as I will ever see, as Mom Barbara and I did see the second plane going in. I mean, just in dumbfounded silence, holding hands, going like, in my head, it's like, oh my God, there's people on that plane. There's like live, living people on that plane. And it's, it's not any different than when you have a plane crash, right? Because, it's still devastating, but when it's purposely being done. So, I know I already broke into that. So, just if it's not something you want to hear or talk about, then, or think about, then, I'm letting you know now. But that's just the only one, okay? Because this is called Miracles or Coincidence. And I used to believe in coincidence, and then I realized everything happens for a reason. And I hate that. I hate that saying. I hate it. Well, I used to hate that saying. I used to hate that saying because it's like, people will say everything happens for a reason. So you're like, oh, so people dying around me is for a reason? I don't know. Who knows? I still wonder today if I would be the same person I am today had my mother lived. Do I want her dead? No, I'd love her to be back, because I'm a much different person, and I'd love her to see this person that I've become. But I just have to depend on those mommy visits from heaven. So, or whatever you want to call it, from out there in the veil. Okay, we'll just refer to it as the veil. Now, I'm not here to step on anyone's beliefs, but I do request that, no matter how this hits you, that you stay in here, stay in this conversation, because it does get interesting. And I think that, even if we don't believe, even if you're a skeptic, that, sometimes being able to think outside the box, or, just, I don't know, challenge your thinking is not a bad thing. And I say challenge your thinking because I've had a lot of things challenge my own thinking. And I have actually flipped, but on some of the things that used to be like, no. Now, I've always believed in ghosts because I've always had experiences. But I was raised on horror movies, so yikes. Oh, I forgot my eyebrows. Sorry. I know they're actually not as light as they look from far away, but when I have this light shining right on me, it looks like I have none. So anyway, sorry, like you really needed that, right? They're just very expressive. So anyways, I have 2 stories that I want to share, and then I'm hoping other people come in, or maybe something will jog my memory and we'll get into it. So anyways, good morning, older sibling. So, and another and, I know usually it's right or okay. Today it's and. Today is Pixel's Gotcha Day. My little baby girl. My little fur ball. One of the Canterbury Tales. Yes, we live on Canterbury Street, so I got clever and called them the Canterbury Tales. And I'm sure you can figure out which kind of tales I'm talking about. But anyways, 8 years ago, yesterday, older sibling and I discussed it. And I said, look, I know I'm never letting you get a cat or a dog or a puppy or a kitten or whatever, but this cat's been in the shelter for 2 years. She was abandoned. She was torn apart by coyotes trying to protect her little kittens. And then I showed her the picture, and she was a little skeptical because it's an adult cat, because she was already 3 and 3.5 actually, and well on her way to being 4. So, but the other thing is she was born 2 months after my mom died. But I'm not smiling because of that, but just because she kind of ties me to that year. But anyways, we decided on it, and I've shared the Pixel story before, so we won't go back into that. But anyways, happy Gotcha Day to my little baby girl. My little baby girl. Oh, I miss her. Oh, I miss her. It was so nice being home with her last week. Even though, I still get the crankies from her, but, it's fine. It's fine. So, anyways, let's start with the 9/11. Miracles and angels. Okay? Miracles and angels. And my dad will always say to me, 'cause he's still kind of a skeptic, my grandmother, and that particular family line is very, my cousin calls them seers, but it's a very psychic family, and a lot of gifts just fall in there. And sometimes I will give a message and it gets misinterpreted because, I'm trying to understand it from over here, but, and then people will say, well, this did happen. And it's like, then they think that you're just full of shit. So, and which is fine, because I'm not here for someone to believe me. If I get a message, because they just come randomly, okay? I'm not a psychic who sits in a building and offers services. If I'm with a friend, it just comes, okay? It just comes and it just happens. And I can't help it. So, I can, but it's like, why? But, anyways, but they're not intrusive. But anyways, older sibling sitting there petting her as we speak. Hi, baby girl. Mommy misses you. I know. The irony is when I was home, I went home actually on Mother's Day, and technically Pixel's the only mother in that house. She did have 2 litters. But they all got adopted out. So, she's a good mama. But anyway, so she is cranky though. So, but I love her. She's been through a lot. So I feel like a lot of times it's just like, kitty PTSD. And I'm not making fun of people with PTSD, because I had been diagnosed later in life with CPTSD because of my own stuff. So, but I do think cats and dogs and all kinds of animals have trauma, So anyways, let's get into this. Before a little bit of something, a whole lot of everything, right? So on 9/11, there was a fire station nearby, first to respond with the fire. I don't think they realized a plane had gone into the building, the first building. And so, of course, everybody's running in and doing all the things. And all of a sudden, this man on fire okay, this man on fire just comes running in front of Fireman Joe. I can't remember his last name. I do apologize. I actually don't think they mentioned his last name, but I think somebody did in the comments and I forgot it. So I apologize, but I believe his name was Joseph or Joe and his brother is Michael. So anyways, his brother Michael is also a firefighter. So anyways, Joe stops. The rest of his firehouse runs into Trade. Was it Trade World 1 or 2 that got hit first? I think it was 2 that got hit first, or maybe 2 fell first and 1 got hit first. But they ran into the building, okay, and they already started going up. But Joe had to sit there. He grabbed the fire blanket and he grabbed all these things to help put this person out, you know, because they're on fire and they're so hot that they are literally incinerating as he's trying to put this fire out. So while all of his brothers run into this building, he's here trying to take, you know, he's doing his job as well, taking care of this poor person who's pretty much dead at this point, but you know, was on fire, and they did try to save his life. So anyways, by the time he's finished tending to this person and getting it, you know, situated and squared away, now I want you to know, I mean, no disrespect in any way that I put things in this, because that was a very tough day, very solemn day. We only witnessed it from on the other side of the country. I can't imagine what it must have been like to be in New York at that time, because, you know, I see the videos and it's still, I still watch it like it was yesterday, because it was just so devastating and so, you know, and yeah. So anyways, so by the time he gets to the building, he thinks, I can't go up there yet, you know, because I mean, they have certain rules they have to follow, and if you get separated, what's going to happen? They're going to start looking for you, and he didn't want them to start looking. So he decides, okay, you know what? I'm just going to stay down here and see what I can do down here, you know, direct people. So he starts directing people. In one occasion, he actually directed people outside, which, you know, through one door, which was not a good idea, because there were people that were taking their final walk. I don't know how to put that to be more sensitive, but unfortunately, some of the people that did run out the front door were getting hit by other people. So it was just tragic and devastating all the way around. You survive coming down, but you don't survive getting out of the building. But so he decided to direct them down into the tunnels. Now, unfortunately, by the time all this chaos is ensuing and all these other things are happening, he's the only first responder there in the lobby at this time. And he's trying to, you know, direct people this way now, because out there, and, you know, it was the right thing to do because nobody thought about it. Nobody knew what was happening when the first one came in. Then he gets a call on the radio that the second one is coming in. And so, you know, it's kind of like shelter in place, do all these things, you know, and it's just utter chaos. So at one point he can start hearing what nobody wants to hear. And it's the building starting to crumble. So he tells everybody, get into the corner, because the corner is where a big part of the foundation is. And, you know, it may not save your life, but going outside sure is going to do it. And, you know, if you're not in the subway tunnels or near it, you know, that could be a problem too. So anyways, he goes into the corner and he's just there. And I don't think anybody else followed him. He couldn't get anyone else to follow him into that corner. And I think that your first instinct, right, is to run out or to run away. But you have a 100-story building about to collapse on you, and there's really nowhere to go. So, you know, he hits the corner and the building falls. And at first he doesn't know whether he's dead or alive. This is exactly what the guy in the video said. He doesn't know whether he's dead or alive. But then he starts to see light. He starts to see like a little bit of light. So he grabs his flashlight, kind of pushes his way through, and, you know, he's able to see. But then he starts calling out for people, and he doesn't hear anybody. The people that he told to come near him are just gone. They're under the rubble now. But there are some people still trapped in the subway, because the building falling also kind of trapped them in the middle. So he was able to get those very minimal people out, and they were able to go outside. So the whole time he's thinking all of this, he's thinking, oh my God, my brother may have been in one of these buildings, you know? And so he's just, you know, in awe. like just not good awe, but like, what is happening? Like this is going to be the longest day of our lives. And so he goes out and, after he's on the street, and then he starts seeing somebody in the distance, and he starts looking closer and closer, and he sees his brother. And his brother is just, he's just, wow. Are you real? Are you not real? And, they hug and they're like, oh, thank God we're together again, so, and the brothers did survive this day, but he was just so excited to see his brother, and his brother being alive, not an angel, not a ghost, not a, just alive. And what had happened was his brother and 2 other firemen had saved another person who had moved into the corner also. And they were trying to pull him out. And so I think this firefighter must have been in building number 2. Okay. So, the one that was underneath, but, they were trying to pull him out. And so because of that, they were safe because they weren't in the building. Because as you know, or, I don't know if everybody knows, but it's pretty, widely spread by now after 25 years that they lost a lot of firemen in the buildings when they collapsed because they were running up. In fact, my dad and I were talking about that yesterday because we were watching the show Emergency. Yeah, a very old show. This man is trapped in the past. But anyway, and I said, isn't that amazing? I said, these guys are heroes. I said, everyone's running away from the fire and they're running at it. And my dad said, well, that's their job. It's like, yeah, but you got to choose to do that job. He's like, yeah, that's true. So it's like, wow. And we knew a fireman, Marty Martin. Marty Martin was a fireman. That was not his first name either. That was actually, because he was a fireman, they called him Marty, and that just kind of stuck. But anyways, so his brother was saved trying also to rescue another person. So long story short, they go through the day, they're doing everything they can do to help. And when it's finally time to go home, he goes back to the fire station and his car is just obliterated by all the falling, concrete, glass, debris. So he decides, well, we have family in Brooklyn, so I'm going to walk across the bridge. So he starts his way across the bridge, and halfway across the bridge, as he's walking, he sees this gentleman in construction gear, an African-American man in construction gear, just kind of looking at him, and just then he waves him over, and, he says, hey, I saw everything, from here, what you were doing and everything. And I saw you, you were very wise to get into the corner when you were down in the bottom of the trade center and, and this, that, and the other. And, it's not registering to him. How does this man know? How does this man know what I did? But he's just ticking off all these little things that he did that day, finding his brother. And, so they start walking and talking, and he's just kind of being, this construction man is just being very comforting, very kind, and just helping him get through. Just helping him get through literally to the other side of the bridge, but in a way to the other side of what he had just seen, what he had just experienced in this day, starting from that person on fire all the way down to walking across this bridge because his firehouse and his, and his car mostly were just gone, just obliterated. And when he gets to the other side, there's a bunch of policemen. And they were watching him. We were watching you. We were worried because, you looked it like you wanted to jump. And he said, we get a lot of jumpers on this bridge. And I think it was the Brooklyn Bridge, obviously, because he was going to Brooklyn. But he said, we get a lot of jumpers on this bridge, and we were really concerned that you were going to go over, especially when you stopped in the middle of the bridge. He's like, no. He's like, I never had that thought. I didn't have that thought in my mind. I just, and they understood where he was coming from. And they're like, well, are you okay? And it's like, yeah, I just, could you, get me a bottle of water and one for my friend here? I'm just really thirsty, and I think we both could use some water. It's been a long day. And they're just kind of looking at him, and they're like, the reason we were worried about you is because you were talking, but there was no one with you. So that man, I'm sitting there going, oh, and the first thing I thought of was that was his spirit guide, that was the person that looks after him in his life. But he came through as someone that would not be kind of looked at like you're crazy or this and that, because the angel also told him, or his spirit guide, however you want to put it, the angel also told him, you need to share this story. Today was filled with a lot of miracles. You know, you're alive, your brother's alive. You know, you did save people that day. There were people that you saved. Yeah, there were some people that you couldn't. But that it was just amazing, right? It's just, you sit there and you're just, you know, I can't imagine being the policeman on the other side going, who's this guy talking to? And of course, you know, these are first responders tend to not talk about these things. Older sibling and I watched a show where paranormal or first responders, it was called Paranormal 911, and first responders would come on and talk about their stories, and a lot of the police officers, especially the ones on the East Coast, would be like, yeah, you don't talk about that, otherwise you're labeled crazy. So, you know, and I know I'm not the only one who's had experiences. The first responders were like, yeah, we got stories. And yeah, because I mean, they're dealing with people who are teetering on the edge of death, right? So yeah, you know, who knows what other miracles happened that day that nobody talks about. But he was very open. He remained a firefighter. He and his brother were very open about sharing their story and how, you know, miracle after miracle or coincidence after coincidence happened to keep them alive. So the next story I randomly found again. So there's a place called Chillingham Castle in England, in the UK. And the very first time I'd ever heard of this castle was years ago. Sissy Joe and older sibling and I were all watching ghosty shows before they took over the Travel Channel. Okay, it was like, you know, a week of ghost stuff. You know, like they did like a live thing from one castle, they did another thing, and they topped it off with a family going to Chillingham Castle and wandering the castle in the dark. Okay, they were ghost hunting basically. And, you know, little things happening and like cabinets opening, and like Sissy Joe and I, and Laura's just like sitting there fascinated. Sissy Joe and I are like, you know, because Joanne had ghostly experiences, and so had older sibling. I had some, but not to the degree that they had, because it's kind of like with my own gifts. I saw a ghost once standing at the threshold of my room, and I just turned it off fast. I'm like, nope. But it wasn't scary. It wasn't even then it wasn't scary, and it didn't feel like it was, you know, malevolent or anything. It felt very benevolent. It felt very peaceful, but I was just kind of like, you know, I was raised on horror movies, you know, it's just kind of like, So, you know, I mean, now it's not a problem. I mean, it was for a little bit as an adult, but, and I'm a little sad that I kind of hit the close button on part of that, because now there is one person that used to connect with me from the other side all the time that was a musician. And I'm kind of bummed because they would play the piano for me. And I was like, oh, you know, but they whistled once. They were whistling in my room once, just whistling a tune. And I knew the tune too. And it was just kind of like, nope. So Peter, I'm sorry, but you know, please come back. But anyway, the next one, so Chillingham Castle had fallen into ruin. I think the last family that lived there was 1935. And Sir Humphrey Wakefield bought, or actually he didn't even have to buy it. He didn't even have to buy the castle. The government gave it to him because it was in such disrepair. It was considered more of like a ruins now than a landmark. So over the course of decades, I would say at least 2 decades, but I mean, I would say the first couple of years were really just trying to rebuild the castle to what it had been when it was first built in the 11th century, or I'm sorry, the 12th century. So in the 1100s. By the 13th century, a lot of the new things had been added in, but it was kind of a fortress too, of sorts. It was, it belonged to relations, as he said in the video, of William the Conqueror. So, I mean, that goes way back, right? I think he was part of the Norman invasion, I think. I don't know. I don't really know a lot about British history, but I know a little bit because it is fascinating. And it's so old, right? I mean, they have buildings older than my country. So that's pretty awesome. But anyway, so it was always famously known for its ghosts. Okay. It was always famously noted for its ghosts. But, Sir Wakefield just decided, I don't care. This is a beautiful place. It has great bones. It has great structure. We're going to do something with it. And he had a lot of before and after photos. And it's amazing what he's done to this place. So, and I'm not sure if it's a heritage site now. If it isn't, it should be. Because it was, a part of a family of, one of the first, I think, rulers, like permanent rulers of Britain. And again, don't quote me on that, all right? But anyways, so at one point, a priest comes in and says to Sir Wakefield, Sir Humphrey, we'll call him Sir Humphrey because that just sounds cooler than Sir Wakefield. So he says to Sir Humphrey, so you got ghosts. He's like, yeah. And he was afraid of them because he'd always heard of them. He'd had a few, he wasn't sure, but he said he could feel them. But he was afraid. He was afraid of them. And so the priest says, okay, well, do you want me to get rid of them? And he says, yes. Yes. You want me to exorcise them? Yes, please. So the next day the priest says, there's too many. I can't do it. And so he's a little disappointed, but he's like, okay, so a couple years later, this priest comes back. Right? And this is not a joke. This is literal. The priest comes back a couple years later and says, do you want me to try again? And he says, oh, yes, if you don't mind. So he tries again, but the next morning, again, he says, I want you to know that they're rooting for you. Which I don't think he was expecting because you could see his face. He kind of lights up when he's like, they're rooting for you. They're rooting for you and they want you to succeed. And so he said, well, at that point, I just realized, okay, well, they're not going to hurt me because he was afraid that they were going to like bonk him on the head or something, which is why he didn't want them there. He was just afraid they're going to hurt him because we hear a lot of these stories, right? About these unsettled ghosts and spirits that are just kind of just not ones that are playful mean, but the ones that are just mean because they're like angry in real life or were angry in real life or just, sad and just taking it out on everybody, right? Trauma based stuff. So anyways, Sir Wakefield or Sir Humphrey says, I'm on a ladder one day and I'm trying to pull out these stones because he didn't just hire people to do this work. He was also very hands-on in rebuilding this castle. So, he was there. He was right there in the trenches with all these guys doing all this stuff. So he's I'm pulling out 2 stones and I pulled out one and the other one started falling and knocked the other one and knocked him off his ladder. And he says, as he's falling from the ladder, he's like, okay, this is it. I'm done for, But then he said, all of a sudden, I land in a straw pile 30 yards away. Or, I'm sorry, not 30 yards away, 10 yards away, which is 30 feet. So 30 feet away from where his ladder was. And people will say, oh, well, the ladder's falling back, so it threw him into the pile. But Sir Humphrey said, I knew they had me. I knew they took care of me. And from then on, they have a very mutual respect for one another and a very mutual, loving, happy relationship. He is fine with them being in his castle. And an older sibling and I were talking about this when I first saw it. And I told her, I said, maybe they're just so grateful that, they were living in ruins, but now he's rebuilding it. He's rebuilding a home that had housed so many people. And he said, he wasn't surprised it was haunted because, they had 8 executions there. The dungeon alone was just crazy. They found bones on top of bones in the dungeon. So some people, like I said, will say, yeah. The skeptics will say that's not possible. But I have fallen from a ladder, not a tall one, but enough where it's like, ladders don't necessarily throw you because when you're falling, you're generally hanging on to the ladder because you're, I don't know, maybe by some miracle you're thinking, oh, maybe it'll go back the other way. Does not happen. But whatever happened when he landed he was falling a pretty good distance down. Okay. But they took him, they took care of him. They tossed him into the straw pile and Sir Humphrey lived on. And Sir Humphrey's pretty up there in age too, and this video was only 3 months ago, but I don't know when it was originally filmed. Okay. And it could have been 3 months ago, or it could have been a long time ago. I don't know. Things that end up on YouTube have a tendency to end up there years after they're originally done. But bless his heart, right? He was just like, first he was afraid of them. Then it's just kind of like, he didn't double down with the priest and say, well, you need to find someone to get rid of them. When the priest said they're rooting for you, he's just like, oh, well, okay, great. So I told older sibling, I said, wouldn't that be great if they like clock in and out every day going, yeah, okay, who are we going to haunt today? What are we going to do for Sir Humphrey? What are we going to do for his guests? Because you can stay here at this castle. You can book nights. It's a beautiful piece of land, and he's done so much with the inside. It is just absolutely gorgeous. He has traveled quite extensively and has filled a lot of the house with his tokens of his travels. But I just love that they did that. So going back to the show that we watched that one night in, I can't remember what they call it. It was like a week of haunting or something. I can't remember, or spooky week, or I can't remember. But I told older sibling, I said, can you imagine that? It's like, all right, we got the Americans coming in, it's like, who's got cabinets? Who's got lights? Who's got the dungeon? And it's like, I got the dungeon, like, all right, on cue, open the cabinet, just these ghosts all working together, right? I mean, that's what I like to think. I like to think they're all like, yeah, everybody has their own thing that they do. It's like, no, I want cabinets, by making the cabinet open and close. And I think with the advent of all these other ghosty shows, that have come in and become famous, and some have gone by the wayside, some still exist. Then there are other ones on YouTube, or you have the people that do just go straight to YouTube because, you can get sometimes a bigger following there and your show can't get canceled. But with the advent of that, I think we've had a different understanding now, a different appreciation of, what the paranormal is. And when it comes to the man on the bridge, the officer said he was not suicidal that day, and that's okay. I'm sure he wasn't. He was just, but I think he needed somebody. He needed someone to get him across that bridge, because I think as the day weighed on him, it's very possible that he may not have made it across that bridge, not in death, but just falling to his knees, just being so weak from, not just the stress of his own job, but the heaviness, the emotional heaviness of that day. And here he was greeted by a friendly face saying, it was a rough day, and I'm sure it was very hard for you. Just someone being very compassionate, very understanding. And that's why I truly believe it was a spirit guide, because the spirit guide knew everything that had happened. He just didn't process that till later, the whole conversation. And maybe he processed it as he was talking about it, going, wait, how would he know this? How is it possible that he would know this when he wasn't there? Because he was watching from the bridge the whole time, right? And I only put that in quotes because I really believe he was just there following him, making sure that he stayed safe, because it wasn't his time. A lot of people say, well, I think it was planned, or, you have all these conspiracy people, right? And I think it was this, I think it was that. There are a lot of people who have talked about that day saying, yeah, I woke up late and I missed my flight to get in there, to get to wherever they were going, and they would have been on that plane. Or, my alarm went off late and I was about to get to work late, and then all of a sudden it's like all this other stuff is happening around me. There were so many stories from that day, because there were just a lot of people not meant to go. Now, everybody that did pass in there, I'm not saying they deserved what they got. They didn't. And it is hard for us to just say out loud, that one thing. When it's your time to go, it's your time to go. It's not meant to be disrespectful. It's not meant to be hurtful. There's one of my favorite quotes, and I don't mean this to be, well, maybe I better not, just because of the actual subject of this, but we'll save it for another time, because it's really not funny. But it's just about adulthood, right? It's just about adulthood, and you're just kind of like, ugh. But it doesn't mean any disrespect against the people who did pass that day. It affected people from all over the country and all over the world. It was a World Trade Center. There was a pastry chef in there who it was her dream job to work at Windows on the World, and she was there early prepping for the day. She was from Hawaii. And obviously when you're at the top of the building, you are not coming down, because the planes went into the top, middle, and the middle. That's why the second one fell first, because that plane unfortunately followed, it did what the other one didn't, and it went just low enough to cause enough of a nasty impact. So we have to, Oh, so Sammy says, my cousin's boss was in New York and had a meeting in one of those buildings. He was a person who was never ever late, but he was that day and therefore wasn't in the building when it fell. See? Miracle or coincidence? I think that's a miracle. It was not his time to go. There was another man, when people say, oh, well, how come more people didn't die? There was a gentleman, and I was the fire warden for my office for 15 years. And so 15 years I had to go to these meetings, and every year it was the same thing. But it had to be the same thing because, there were always different fire wardens, but, older sibling and I were the ones for a while. If she was her office and my office. So we'd always plan to go at the same time. It's like, but this one gentleman always told the story, and I cannot for the life of me, I apologize, remember his name. But he ran drills until these people, he was security. He was floor security for, oh God, what was that one company on that floor? Older sibling might remember. It was a big one. I think it was either insurance or finance. But anyways, he would run drills, fire drills. And so he got his people so trained that when that fire alarm went off that day, they all just picked up their stuff and left. And the majority of them lived. When he went back up to see if he could help the firemen and other people on other floors, unfortunately, he was in the building when it collapsed. But I'd like to think that, he was their angel on earth, because he saved so many people in that office. So many people. Older sibling, remind me, didn't you say you heard a voice? Because I remember we talked about your grandfather. Older sibling had a very nasty car accident in September of 1979. And if she had known how to drive a horse trailer, it could have been much more devastating than it was. In fact, we may have been siblingless. She would have never poofed into our lives. But she knew how to control the car long enough. We talked about this before. It had the faulty Firestone tires, and this is back in the 70s. So it actually is also what triggered her CRPS, or RSD as it used to be known. But if I remember correctly, she heard a voice saying it was going to be okay, or something like that. It's been a while since we talked about it, so I apologize. It's not, burned into my memory. But when we were talking about it, the first person that popped into my head was her grandpa. I said, oh, it was her grandpa Hugh. Her mom's dad. And her mom's dad had passed before she was born. Her other grandfather passed when she was very, very young, but that was a bit of a sketchy relationship. Not in that way. He was just, unfortunately, he partook in the nectar of the gods a little too heavily. So yeah, but her other grandfather died when her mother was a teenager. But she had heard a voice. And no, I know it was your mom's dad, but I couldn't remember. But I think she told me that she heard a voice, and I said, oh, it was your grandpa. And she's all, that makes a lot of sense. It kind of hit her sideways because she had never thought about it before. But, she just remembers hearing that voice. And I said, I think it was your grandfather. Because I know for a fact that he looks in on her and takes care of her, just like her grandma Elva, her dad's mom, does. Because she raised her. Well, she helped raise her. Her parents were musicians, so when she became of school age, they couldn't take her, obviously, on the road. And they stayed mostly at home, but musicians don't work during the day, okay? They work at night. So Grandma Elva, bless her heart, because I love her. I love her energy. I don't care what you say. I love when she comes through, because she's got this. I told Laura, I said, she have a raspy voice, and she's a little bit. And I'm all, I said, I don't know why I always see her. I always see her on the other side, just sitting in a big, cozy, poofy leather chair, smoking a cigar and just drinking one hand, cigar in the other. And I don't know if she drank or not, but that's what I see. It's just her enjoying life, like kicking back and going, "Oh, what's Laura up to today? What's my Lori up to today?" So, anyways, like I said, when I say it's your time to go, it's your time to go. Again, I mean no disrespect by that. Absolutely zero. Older sibling's grandfather died in a car accident on his way back to Colorado from Texas, because the family was originally from Texas. And it was devastating because her mom was still a teenager. Her aunt was just a little bit older, so also still a teenager. And all of a sudden they had to figure out life without dad and, the husband, right? And grandma lost her husband. So, yeah, so it was a bit upending, but I think it was nice to know that, that he was there, making sure she was okay and reminding her just, not to panic and, that it was going to be all right. So, also, I remember the day Sissy Joe passed away. I remember like it was yesterday. There's a lot of, I'm just going to say the way I found out was not the way I think I should have found out. But my boss had to come in. I had to call her from the conference room because I couldn't move. And when she found me, she literally had to peel me off the wall because I was just stuck up again. I was just in shock. I was just sorry. And it's funny. The minute I mentioned her, this little hummingbird just came up to the window. And a lot of times when I see a pink butterfly, I think of her because she loved pink. Even before she got breast cancer, she loved pink. But I remember my friend sent me home. Actually, I don't think she was my boss yet. She said, I'll go tell our boss that she was sending me home. And she sent me home. And I had already called older sibling. And she told me to come home as well. But, I mean, to be honest with you, I was not going to be useful the rest of the day. And on the way home, I called my dad to let him know. Because, he knew her. He and my mom knew her very well as well. And as I was passing her building, which is on the way to the freeway, I was talking to my dad, and all of a sudden I hear this giggle. Okay, and right as I was saying her name, I'm like, "Yeah," I said, "I just wanted to let you know that Joanne passed." And we're both sitting there quietly for a second, just I'm saying it, not realizing it's coming out of my mouth, and he's just processing it. And I told him, I said, "Are you watching something on TV?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm watching this." I'm all, "Did someone just laugh?" And he's like, "No." But through the entire car, I just heard her laugh. And I could tell that to some people and they'd be like, "Wow." And I could tell it to other people and it'd be like, "Oh, well, I'm sure it was just, whatever." It was not explainable. I had the windows up because I can't hear the phone on the speakers if I don't have the windows up. And my dad was like, "No, when you called, I paused the TV anyway." And I knew it was her. And I wouldn't exactly call it a miracle, but I would call it her just saying, "I'm okay. I'm okay." And on that day of 9/11, a lot of family members said that, they had, one woman said she had a visitation from her sister. And when she was about to reach out for her, her sister was just said, she looked beautiful. She was just kind of glowing and shimmering. And she's all, "I know I was wide awake. I was wide awake." And she's all, and as she just smiled at her, her sister smiled at her. And then as the sister was reaching out and was going to say something, she disappeared. And they said a lot of families, even though they didn't come out publicly with this, had a lot of goodbyes from their families after they had passed away on that horrible day. So I apologize for crazy. Sometimes I can make it through the story, other times I can't. But I do miss her. I do miss her a lot. And next month, will be 11 years since she passed. She passed 10 months after my mom. Sorry. That was a lot to handle in such a short amount of time. And I also felt bad for older sibling because she wasn't feeling well the night before. So I was going to go pick her up, and that night we were going to have dinner with Sissy Joe, but she never got to say goodbye. So, yeah, but I will always hold that memory. And same with my mom. When my dad called me, your mom, he's all, I think it's time. And I had already told my boss, I said, when my dad calls me, I'm out. I said, I'll send you a text. I'll shoot you a text. And I said, I'm gone until until she passes, and then I'll be back. And I didn't care if I missed work. I didn't care if, they fired me, because this was more important. But she's like, that's fine. And so I did. And, I got there and I just sat down and I just took my mom's hand, and my dad said she went to sleep during halftime last night. The Chargers were playing the night before. And then, she hasn't woken up since. And so I figured I better call you. And it's like, no, it's okay. It's all right. So, I got there and I just took her hands, and for a brief moment, she opened her eyes and she just looked at me and she says, I love you, babe, but what are you doing here? And I'm all, well, I said, I love you too, and I'll let Dad tell you, because I didn't know what to say. But I think she knew. I think that was just her taking whatever little bit she had left to leave me with something. And I consider that a miracle as well. Because not everybody gets that. An older sibling didn't. And I feel for her when those things happen. I do. But another miracle, and you don't have to call it a miracle, but another, happening of divine intervention. We were talking about this the other day with her dad. Her dad had a series of health issues in the last couple of years of his life. Plus, on top of that, he'd lost his first wife, who he'd still rebuilt a friendship with. He had just lost his second wife, Laura's stepmom, who was also, who became best friends with his ex-wife. So, they were just a wonderful set of people. And older siblings, also an only child. Okay. We adopted each other as sisters, and I guess that's the one thing about being an only child. You can adopt your siblings, right? You can just pick who is so close to you that you just melt right into their life, just like Sissy Joe. And I just remember telling her, your dad's not going to go until you let him go. And she's all, well, I'm trying to let him go. And I said, no. I said, he won't go until he knows you're going to be okay. And so she said all these beautiful, heartfelt words to him. And she meant every single one of them. They came straight from beyond her heart, from the bottom of her soul. And then, the minute she said, I'm going to be okay, we'll be okay, he let go. He let go. Laura and I watched his monitor go from alive to 0 in less than 5 minutes. And the nurse was standing at the door just saying, she's like, I have never seen anything like that in my life. So I've never seen anybody let go that fast. And it literally happened after she said, we'll be okay. Jackie will be okay. We'll take care of each other. We're all going to be okay. She's like, you can go. And then on top of that, Laura was like, I hope he's okay afterwards. And, I was standing by the door, and, all of a sudden we hear this voice going, Laura. And we knew that voice. We both looked at each other. And unfortunately, Aunt Jackie didn't hear it, but older sibling and I just kind of looked at each other, and she's like, did you hear that? I'm like, yeah, I heard that. Did you hear that? And she's like, yeah. And obviously, because she just asked me. And so I'm like, hold on. So before I said anything, because we both knew who it sounded like, I walked around, and I looked at the nurse's station. The nurses are there very quietly. Okay. They're just doing their paperwork. No one's yelling. No one's doing nothing. They're just, and I looked around and the entire, actually it wasn't the ER, I'm sorry, the ICU. The entire ICU was empty. There was nobody else in there but us and the nurses. And I looked at Laura and I said, you know what? That sounded like Gladys. That was his second wife. I said, that sounded like Gladys. But it happened after she, she just said, she was just wondering, like, I hope he transitioned okay. Because, we've heard things that people do struggle with transitioning sometimes. But yeah, so we knew. And I told her, I said, I think Gladys, because Gladys would have been the strongest willed one out of all the ones that passed over there. But I told her, I said, I think Gladys is trying to tell you that your dad is okay. That, they got him. He's good. He'll be all right. So Sammy says, I totally believe in miracles and try to recognize and be grateful for them when they occur. I agree. Have you ever had those moments where it's just kind of like you're not paying attention and then something happens around you and you're like, whoa? Or like when you're running late, right? And all of a sudden there's an accident on the freeway, probably about where you might have been had you ran on time. I remember one time I had a boyfriend that lived in downtown San Diego, and I was going to visit him, and it was at night and there weren't a lot of cars out, but the light turned green. But for some reason, I don't know what happened. I was just not paying attention. And this other car, this van comes out, and he's got the green light and he's just zooming because, he didn't have to stop. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they crashed, like he crashed with somebody else who ran a red light. And I'm just sitting there going, whoa. Had I been paying attention, that could have been a lot worse, because he was in a van. I was in a tiny car. I was in a little tiny, hamster car. So, I was very young back then. It was my first car. But I was just like, and it was just kind of like, whoa. So, I think the strongest message is, and like I said, if you're a skeptic, I'm not here to make you believe. I'm here to challenge people to think outside the box. I think we should all think outside the box. If we disagree with something, then, we should ask ourselves why. But when it comes to these kind of things, it's not for me to tell people to believe in ghosts or miracles or, the power of prayer or the power of manifesting or the power of this, that, or the other, or coincidence, because it was cute. Sir Humphrey kept calling it coincidence after coincidence kept happening in his house, and all for the betterment, right? So he actually used the word coincidence when it really was just, as he had mentioned, he's, oh yeah, the ghosts were making all these things happen in my house, and they were making it better, and they were, putting, they were poofing everything for him, right, and helping him out. So Laura's cousin Rodney left for work early the day of the San Francisco earthquake. That'd be 1989, I believe. Otherwise, he would have been under the bridge that collapsed. So see, I remember her and I were talking about that. Yeah, we watched a whole thing, Mega Disasters, on the History Channel. Lord have mercy. San Francisco didn't have a chance between the earthquake and then the fires and then the people trying to put out the fires, not the firemen, but the people who thought they knew what they were doing, causing more fires. It's like, San Francisco did not have a chance. I felt bad for them. But yeah, the Bay Bridge. It was the Bay Bridge, right? The Oakland Bay Bridge or Bay Bridge? I don't know how many bridges they got there. I know the Golden Gate. And I know I've been over both of them. But I'm not too fond of that one that collapsed right in the middle either. But Rodney, she told us this story the other day. She said, Rodney was driving out, and, he had left work that early that day, and he had just gotten to the end of the bridge when it started collapsing. And she said that he had mentioned that he could just see it kind of, all the stuff happening behind him, like, whoa, so, and that was pretty harrowing. Don't quote me on this, but if my memory serves, I believe it took a couple days for them to get everybody out that was alive. And I'm sure there were people who unfortunately did not make it through that day. Earthquakes are crazy. They're mean. They're mean and they're crazy. But anyways, so yeah, we could go on this subject forever, right? Yes, the Bay Bridge. Thank you, older sibling. Yeah, we could go on this subject forever and a day. But I do believe when we have even pets that pass away. I remember one time sitting in the living room and Georgie was new to the household. And all of a sudden, I see him coming out of the kitchen, and I'm like, that's weird. And older sibling's like, what? And I'm all, he's trotting, just like Lucas used to trot. And then all of a sudden, I saw like this bluish looking cotton something or other that was shaped exactly like Lucas's tail when he would trot. But he was very, I don't want to say prissy, but he was very proper. I told her if he had a voice, he would have sounded like Ronald Coleman, old-time actor. But I said, yeah, if he could talk, he'd sound like Ronald Coleman. But yeah, and I saw it for a moment, and I told older sibling, by the time she looked, it was gone, and George was walking normal again. And also, Lucas used to stand or sit on the landing, and every so often we would see him like he was. I asked the older sibling one day, because I face that way, and the couch, she sits on the couch, and that faces the TV. But if I sit proper in my chair, I'm facing the stairs and the landing and all that stuff. And I told her, I said, why is Lucas doing this? And she started crying. And I'm like, oh. It's like, what did I do? So I'm going to finish it with this story. We found pictures of Mom Barbara's cat, Kitty Tom, who looked exactly like Lucas. And she said that she used to tell Laura that she would teach him how to box. And they named him Kitty Tom. But she would teach him how to box. And that's exactly what was happening on the landing. And older sibling was crying because she knew my mom is visiting. My mom is visiting. And maybe that was her way of showing her, or maybe she was just playing with the cat. We still blame her for taking him early. Yeah, he actually had a congenital heart defect. And so that we didn't know about. And, I think, we forget as humans to check our own hearts. And when we do that, we forget to check the hearts of our little babies. So, our little fur babies. So, keep an eye on all that, okay? But, Sammy loves Ron Coleman. I love Random Harvest. That's my favorite movie of his. I absolutely love it. But anyways, I digress. So I'm going to finish it off with the cute kitty story. But yeah, we could talk about this for days, right? So I hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you all for popping in. If you stayed this long and you were a skeptic, I appreciate you and I thank you. Whether you think they're just it's in our heads or you just think it's coincidence, it's okay. It's okay. A lot of skeptics generally need their own experience to really, make them believe. And I don't know, maybe it challenges their own thoughts of what they think is out there. So I'm not here to change your mind. I'm just here to tell a story and to share a story because they're kind of fun. Sir Humphreys was just my favorite, to be honest with you, because it was just like, oh, they're really rooting for you. The priest is telling them this. They're rooting for you. So anyways, I know I told the story a little bit different than probably how he told it because I'm going by memory, but I still do have it in my history on YouTube. So I will put it in the comments on Facebook. All right. It's a very short thing and it's very cute, but, and he's just adorable. Oh, he's just adorable. I just want to hug him. So anyways, have a great day, everybody. I'll see you back here Monday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific time, Facebook Live. I go across the social media board. Yes. Muddy says, I'm glad I didn't have a show suggestion. This was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. See, it was meant to be, right? It was meant to be, not a coincidence. It was meant to be. It was meant to be talked about. So again, have a great day, everybody. Have a safe and wonderful weekend. And I will see you back here on Monday. Thank you for watching.